Thank you, Mr. Wolf, very much. And our next witness is Mr. Robert Diamond, who is a security fellow at the Truman National Security Project. He is a former lieutenant in the United States Navy and completed deployments in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I respectfully request to submit my written testimony for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Chairman Markey, Ranking Member Upton, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply honored to have the opportunity to appear before this panel to discuss the critically important topic of promoting clean energy policies that will reduce America's dependence on oil and the impact that dependency is having on our national security. America's reliance on oil is our Achilles heel. I fundamentally believe that a comprehensive energy strategy, one that cuts our addiction to fossil fuels, boosts clean energy technology, and moves our nation dramatically towards energy independence, is vital to our national security, to the safety of our men and women in uniform, and to the fight against terrorism. The bottom line is this: we must put America in control of its energy future. I make these arguments before you today as a fellow citizen, deeply concerned about ensuring the future prosperity and security of our country. I'm a security fellow at the Truman National Security Project and have been deeply engaged in the debate about our energy security. And I'm a veteran of the United States military, having served as an officer in the Navy for 7 years. In 2004, I deployed to the Northern Arabian Gulf. My ship, a guided missile destroyer, was assigned the mission of defending 2 Iraqi oil terminals that sit just off the southern coast of that country. These 2 terminals are the economic crown jewels of that country, with 90+% of Iraq's oil flowing through them onto supertankers that take that oil to the global market. It was no secret that these terminals would be prime targets for an insurgent attack. In April 2004, that attack came in the form of a wave of 2 suicide boats. We lost 2 U.S. Navy sailors and 1 U.S. Coast Guardsman, as well as 4 other service members who sustained serious injuries. The oil terminals, however, were safely defended. I tell the story because it speaks directly to why we are here today. At the very core of my wartime deployment was an energy security mission. Brave sailors and Coast Guardsmen gave their lives defending a global oil infrastructure half a world away. My experience is just a recent chapter in the U.S. military's decades-long role of defending our global oil supplies. And I'm not alone in feeling this way. Over the course of the last year, I've been part of a national coalition of hundreds of veterans called Operation Free. These veterans have crisscrossed the country by biodiesel-powered bus, over 25,000 miles in all, with one simple message: secure America with clean energy. Retired Vice Admiral Dennis McGinn captured the national security dangers of our addiction to oil in testimony he gave before the Senate last year. He said in 2008, we sent $386 billion overseas for oil, much of it going to nations that wish us harm. This is an unprecedented and unsustainable transfer of wealth to other nations. It puts us in the untenable position of funding both sides of the conflict and directly undermines our fight against terror. Former CIA Director Jim Woolsey explained it this way: except for our own civil war, this is the only war that we have fought where we are paying for both sides. We pay Saudi Arabia $160 billion a year for its oil, and $3 to $4 billion of that goes to the Wahhabis, who teach their children to hate. We are paying for these terrorists with our SUVs. A Truman Project colleague of mine conducted an analysis which concluded for every $5 rise in the price of crude oil, Putin's Russia receives more than $18 billion annually. Ahmadinejad's Iran an additional $7.9 billion annually, and Chavez's Venezuela an additional $4.7 billion annually. This is clearly not in our national interest. No one is more acutely aware of this problem than the Department of Defense, and they are actually leading the efforts on breaking our dependency on oil. DoD is the largest energy consumer in the nation, and our nation is the largest energy consumer in the world. For example, the Navy has set ambitious goals for shifting the fleet to renewable energy sources. Just last week on Earth Day, the Navy successfully conducted the first flight test of the Green Hornet, an FA-18 Super Hornet fighter jet that flew using a 50-50 blend of conventional fuel and biofuels. This test was the first step in achieving Secretary Mavis's goal of sailing, by 2012, the Great Green Fleet, a carrier battle group entirely powered by sustainable, renewable fuel sources, including nuclear power. But that is just the military. And when it comes to the rest of our nation, frankly, we're simply not doing enough. Congress must act. Without legislation from Congress, too many sectors of our economy and our country will continue to stagger along using the dirty fuels of our past. This is not a problem that can wait for future generations to solve. It is imperative that you, our elected officials, solve this problem now and enact comprehensive clean energy legislation that will put American power back to work. Part of that solution also involves making sure that our regulatory agencies like the EPA continue to have the tools and authority necessary to drive this transition to a clean energy economy. It makes no sense to me to deny these agencies the robust regulatory authority they need. Doing so is the equivalent of pulling your troops off the battlefield before the reinforcements arrive. In other words, it's surrendering the fight. So I close with this simple request. Help us build a new clean energy economy that will make our country more prosperous, that will help make us more secure, and that will once and for all put America back in control of its energy future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Lieutenant, very much. And our final witness.
Lieutenant, if I could just ask you one quick question. And we understand the problem with climate change is a global problem. And I certainly appreciate your service and appreciate the wisdom that you brought for us today. When I've visited with the Iraqi oil minister, I believe his name was Dr. Siristani, he's a Harvard-educated petroleum engineer. He assured me that none of Iraq's oil was going to be, was involved, there were no Chinese contracts involved with Iraq's oil, and yet I hear from individuals like yourself coming back that the Chinese were all over Basra in 2005, 2006, looking to tie up oil contracts. Do you have any insight for us as to what's going on there?
I don't have any firsthand knowledge of Chinese presence on the ground in my time in the country, sir.
And again, I appreciate the problem. We want to produce American energy for the security standpoint, but on a global standpoint, from the carbon production and the pollution, we do have to be mindful of what's happening in those other countries.
Absolutely. You see a Chinese Navy now that's looking to make a global presence and building itself aircraft carriers and submarines that are defending their own energy, free flow of energy around the world. Yes, sir.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Great.
It's also important to recognize that each of the 4 other major recessions that the United States has experienced from 1973 forward was precipitated by a significant run-up in oil prices.
And you believe that the recession that we're still in was precipitated by that run-up to $147?
No question that was, as I said, the match that lit off the financial meltdown in the summer of 2008.
And again, that didn't have anything to do with Louisiana or Texas or Arkansas's oil production. That had to do with what was going on overseas that put us at the mercy of OPEC.
No question.
Yeah. So I just think that's important going forward, that we continually divide this question between the 8 million barrels of oil that we produce here and the 11 or 12 million barrels of oil a day that we import. Again, as Lieutenant Diamond said, from places that we probably should not be importing them from. Lieutenant Diamond, would you like to comment?
Just a fact, Mr. Chairman, when you talk about cost, for every $5 increase in the price of a barrel of oil, that costs the Department of Defense $1.7 billion. That's larger than the procurement budget of the United States Marine Corps. So when you talk about scope of the price impact on the Department of Defense, it's tremendous.
So repeat that again, and that goes right down to the American taxpayer.
Exactly.
So explain that a little bit more.
So for every $5 increase in the price of a barrel of oil, that costs the Department of Defense an additional $1.7 billion in energy costs. That's more money just spent on energy costs than we actually are spending on procuring equipment and bullets and tanks.
So that comes right out of our defense. That comes right out of our defense budget.
Right out of our troops' pockets, is what I'm trying to say, sir.
Yeah. So that's terrible. So we do. So there's no question we need a plan that we put in place to have a different pathway for our consumption of oil from a national security perspective.
And Mr. Diamond, you have firsthand experience in the military guarding Iraqi oil terminals, and I want to commend you for your service to this country. I'd guess your salary was part of that, what RAND estimates, $83 billion per year protecting our access to oil. And I think if we reduced our dependence on oil, that can mean a lot in terms of savings for the armed services and limiting our involvement in places where we don't need to be. We will not need to be. Is that right?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, and also not to sound over dramatic, but the military also measures this cost in human lives when you're talking about
Yes.
our involvement overseas, not just dollars or jobs.
Well, clean energy.
Mr. Drevna, Lieutenant Diamond.
It would simply be the takeaway, sir, that again, these current conflicts where America has put itself in a position of funding both sides of this war on terrorism due to its reliance on overseas energy supplies, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Wolf. Anyway, thank you all so much for your testimony today. With the thanks to the committee, this hearing is adjourned.